In this video we're going to walk through the installation procedure for the Vagabond Motorsports Fender Eliminator kit for Kawasaki's new 2017 Z900. Now, like most products from Vagabond Motorsports, we always try to reuse the OEM hardware and running gear when appropriate and when it looks good. And in the case of the Z900, like much of the Z line from Kawasaki over the past 2 years, the turn signals and license plate light are both pretty high quality units. Obviously they're DOT certified and are going to keep you fully legal in this installation if you reuse them. Only kind of unfortunate part of the Z900 is the kind of fit in the factory fender in terms of where that rubber boot on both the grommet on the license plate light and the rubber boot on the turn signals fit is kind of loose, and so you end up with a little bit of a bouncy, sloppy feel, and we're going to tighten that up in this installation by designing the Fender Eliminator. Now, to quickly review some of the details of the Vagabond Motorsports Fender Eliminator kit for the new Z900. Like a lot of our kits, it's a single piece construction, CNC laser cut, CNC bent from 5000 series aluminum. It's going to be powder coated in a UV resistant satin black powder coat, so it's very durable finish. We have a very unique construction in the industry where our side flanges that mount the turn signals also fold under, have a stud running through 1 and 2 flanges of sheet metal. So once this is bolted up to the motorcycle, these flanges act like gussets and keep everything very stiff and very rigid. You'll see the Z900 Fender Eliminator has a little bit of a unique cutout up on this top face. This is for clearance to the factory tail. Section plastics. There's an oval cutout for a factory or a rubber grommet so that the factory cabling is going to be protected from chafing and preventing shorts and things like that. Also preventing water and dust and things like that from getting into the tail section of the motorcycle. Like most Vagabond Motorsports Fender Eliminator kits, the rubber bumpers and the license plate mount. There's slots in the license plate mount portion of the Fender Eliminator to accommodate a handful of different plate sizes. The rubber bumpers are going to be to reduce buzzing and sometimes cracking of the license plate depending on how much vibration the motorcycle puts out. You can see we've got cutouts in the Fender Eliminator, this kind of 3 hole pattern, as well as these interesting kind of peanut shaped cutouts that are specifically set up for the factory running gear. And so this will be a very kind of OEM grade installation. Our kit is going to come with a full set of hardware. Obviously you're going to get a full set of color instructions to kind of supplement this video. Our hardware kit is going to be 4 M6 lock nuts, 4 machined aluminum spacers, 2 stainless steel washers, and a rubber grommet. And so all that's going to come with the kit. As for tools you're going to need for the installation of the Fender Eliminator kit, you're going to need a 4 and a 5mm Allen head, either T-handle or just regular old L keys, Phillips screwdriver, and an 8 and a 10mm hex socket and a ratchet, and having a little extension on that helps. As for some alternatives, if you have a power driver and all the bits you need for it, that'll speed things up quite a bit. Well, as I'm sure you can imagine, the first step for most Fender Eliminator installations is going to be to remove the factory rear fender. In the case of the Z900, like most motorcycles, you're going to start with the rear passenger seat, removing it with the key on the left side of the frame. A little bit different than a lot of bikes. Z900's main rider seat comes out by sliding back this kind of U-shaped piece of round bar steel and pulling up on the rear side of the seat. So you can see that's where the kind of sliding rail comes in and out. And then you have these nice kind of teeth on these posts that give a nice little pop when you remove it. So a little bit different than a lot of bikes out there. Once you've got the seats off, you can see the 6 bolts. So there's 2 Phillips head and then 4 4mm Allen head key bolts that we're going to remove, and we're going to slide this whole top section of the tail plastics off. And that's going to be required to get to the wiring loom and make the generally speaking the installation much easier. So you're going to start with these 2 Phillips head screws in the front, and what's important to know is that these are screwing directly into little plastic posts in the under tray. So there's mostly during the reinstallation process, there's absolutely no point in over tightening those because you're just going to break something. The 4 bolts at the rear are going into full metal threads, and that's the primary structural mount. What you will see on these 4 bolts in the back is that they have an aluminum little flanged spacer so that they don't crack the plastic when you tighten them. And they also have a very small, thin, clear washer, plastic washer, in between that shoulder spacer and the plastic to keep it from scratching it. And so don't lose any of those when you're removing the 4 bolts. And if it's loose, you kind of pull the bolt out at an angle and it's going to take the spacer with it. So set all this hardware aside because we are going to reuse these 6 bolts during the reinstallation process. Now once you've got all the bolts off, the only thing holding this tail section piece on are a bunch of little teeth in little grooves or tabs, and you're going to just slide the whole section rearward and upward a bit, and it isn't quite free, and you kind of just, you'll feel kind of tab by tab release, and very gently, so that you don't break any tabs off, you can kind of release them individually until you get the whole section off. Set that aside. Once that top cover's off, we're going to release the 3 electrical connectors, which are going to be all in this kind of glossy black vinyl boot. And you're going to have to pull that back to reveal one smaller 2-pin connector. That's going to be your license plate light, and then 2 larger, one black, one gray 2-pin connectors. And the way these guys release is by depressing the front portion of the tab, and the smaller section will slide out. So this is a fully, no tools required except a bit of finger strength sometimes. There we go. So once those are removed, one side stays with the motorcycle obviously, the other side is actually going directly under this kind of foam pad in a little channel in the fender out through the middle. So it's ready to be released. The only thing holding the factory fender on are 4 big 5mm Allen head bolts, and then bizarrely, just like the Z650, there's one Phillips head screw, plastic thread cutting screw, connecting the plastic under tray to the fender. And that's something we're not going to reuse, but you need to remove it to get the fender off. Once you've got that guy out, there are just the 4 5mm head bolts, and there may or may not be a factory Loctite in sufficient quantity to make this a hard removal process, but whenever there's 4 bolts like this, I recommend you at least loosen all of them half turn or so before you really go at it, so that you don't bind one up. Particularly if the Loctite is really nasty, you want to make sure you can crack loose all 4 before you get down to the last one. But once you do get to that last one, you need to be a little bit careful in that you don't just unscrew it and let your fender fall away. So what I would recommend is that you hold the fender with one hand, loosen that last bolt with the other, and you're going to get to this point where you can see there's a little bit of flex here in this factory tail section, and it's certainly enough to gently, but you can kind of guide the connectors towards the center of the light, or center of that bolt pattern, and slide them out one by one. There is a little tab that we'll point at in a second that will make getting the bigger connectors out a little challenging. Let's see. There we go. So once you've gotten this factory fender with the 3 electrical connectors on them, we'll take that to the bench and break this fender apart. So the factory fender is actually going to split in half kind of lengthwise, and it's going to leave the license plate light partially attached or fully attached to one side. And so in order to split it in half, there's going to be one 8mm bolt, 8mm nut that is holding this reflector on, and is also acting as a bit of a pin connecting those two pieces. So if you remove that nut, you can then remove the reflector and set both of those aside. Then there's going to be two Phillips head screws, one here and one here, that are plastic thread cutting screws. And again, grab your Phillips, and remove those. All these fasteners are not going to be reused if you're in the Fender Eliminator installation, but if you want to kind of keep your factory Fender, for whatever reason, you should obviously store these fasteners together with the factory Fender if you ever want to put it back on. So once we've got the fender in half, you can see one side actually only holds one turn signal, the other side has a turn signal and the license plate light. Like most of Kawasaki's new kind of nice turn signals, there is a little cover plate, a steel cover plate. Use your Phillips screwdriver to remove that central small Phillips head screw. You will be reusing this for the Fender Eliminator installation as long as you're keeping your factory lights, which I recommend. Then you can use that same screwdriver to pry out this little central steel insert, after which point you grasp the kind of entirety of the turn signal and rock it towards the front of the motorcycle in this case, or at least push down on the clear lens portion. You'll see there's a little bit of a, a taper on one side that makes going in and out a little easier. So that's how you remove the turn signal. You're going to do that on both sides, and that is again see if I can't get in there a little better. The central screw, that guy was tighter than normal. Cover plate comes off. The little insert gets popped out. This all gets reversed when you put these into the Fender Eliminator, and you rock the fender or the turn signals out. Now, it's going to be hard with a power driver if that's what you're using to get this. There's two Phillips head screws that connect the license plate light to the fender, just because it's kind of a weird angle. It's kind of buried in there, and it can be easy to strip things with a power driver. So I would recommend using your good old-fashioned Phillips screwdriver for this part. But there are two plastic thread cutting screws, two big washers, and then we actually, in this case, we're going to also take the rubber grommets out of this, because we do want to reuse that, because it does help attenuate some of the vibration of the motorcycle. So you start by removing the actual light, and then you're going to remove both. In one case, I think it slides in on this guy into this kind of larger hole. The other one you're just going to pull out, and you just kind of manhandle one end into the hole and pull it through. So what you want to end up with is just a bunch of plastic and reflectors that you're going to set aside, and you're going to reuse the light, the bushings, two washers, two thread cutting screws, and then all the turn signal hardware. So once you've finished stripping the factory lights from the factory fender, we're going to go ahead and reinstall those lights into the Fender Eliminator body. We're going to start with the license plate light, and that means as we begin by shoving these two gray kind of D-shaped grommets into the two left and right holes of the Fender Eliminator. There's no secret here, a secret kind of technique here beyond shoving the grommet into the hole and smoothing out the flange so that it's not kind of wrinkled on either end. So get that guy, those two bushings or grommets pushed in, then thread the license plate light connector through the central hole, I'm going to pull it out of the way and align the two plastic bosses with the two holes and kind of push it in, and it'll be a little snug already. And if you flip that to the back side, what you'll see is the two bosses almost sticking proud of the grommets. And on some Z bikes from Kawasaki, we recommend you use the two stainless steel washers that we supply in the kit to go on top of the bushings around the bosses, and then reuse your factory screw and fender washer. And that, what all it does is it squeezes that bushing harder than the factory fit, and gives that light a much tighter fit. Now that is kind of it's an optional step, and in the case of this particular bike, it is not needed. So we'll see. So if it's not needed, and it's probably the preferred way to start, is to reuse your screw and your large fender washer and just tighten it up. You'll tighten it up till the bottom's out on both, and it's going to be pretty easy to get a feel for if you like the tightness of that fit or not. And if you don't, if it's too loose for your taste, center that washer up a bit, then add those two washers that we supply. You'll see on this particular bike, it's pretty firm. So I wouldn't go ahead and recommend adding those washers. The fit of the Fender Eliminator is already going to be much tighter than the factory bike, but if for whatever reason you do have kind of a sloppier fit than you'd like, use those two stainless steel washers. If you don't need those two washers and you like the fit of the light, save them or discard them, but you won't need them for the rest of the installation. So once you've got the license plate light installed, we're going to go ahead and put the turn signals into the motorcycle, or into the Fender Eliminator. Right and left turn signals are pretty easy to distinguish from one from another on the Z900 and most Kawasaki's, but obviously they point this way. This is going to be the right turn signal with the gray connector. We'll start with that one. Once again, kind of start with the threading through the electrical connector. I'm going to flip this over because it's going to be much easier to see. But we start by putting this section of the kind of groove and the turn signal down at the base of that cutout, and kind of push how well you seat that is going to determine how easy or hard this is. And then kind of rotate the whole turn signal in towards the center of the Fender Eliminator, and you should hear a small pop or click, and that is going to determine whether it's home or not. And you'll see that's already much tighter than the OEM Fender. Then you're going to start with these the little steel inserts. The nut that's welded on the back side is obviously going to point down, and the way that I recommend you install these is get one side seated, preferably front to back, which that means is that get this insert kind of in that way. I like to seat the two front little teeth first, so kind of push it in and then rock the back section in and push it in. And there's no one way to do this, but what you're going to end up with is that middle nut plate being captured by the four little rubber teeth that are on that turn signal. Once you've got that, you're going to reuse the cover plate and the screw from the factory Fender. That cover plate has a little tooth that fits in really only one way, into kind of covers the whole thing. All this does is squeeze the assembly, and on this one you can go straight through the hole on the opposite end to screw this screw down, so it's rather convenient. We're going to repeat that for the left signal very quickly, and the process is exactly the same as demonstrated on the right, which is seat the signal at the base of the cutout and then rotate it in. Super simple. Then you thread in the nut plate, seat that by starting kind of at the front. At least that's our recommendation. You can always start at the back too, depending on access. And you can also just get a couple of the teeth seated and squeeze it in. So that was the brute force approach. But once you got the insert on, again, cover plate, screw, factory screw, always reusing the factory hardware. So this is a replication of the factory setup, except for the fact that the turn signal flanges are a little thicker on the Vagabond part, so that the turn signals are going to be a firmer fit. Now, this one, because you can't obviously go through where the turn signal is, you'll just go at an angle with your screwdriver. And the only thing to keep note is don't grind your screwdriver up against the corner of the Fender Eliminator, otherwise you may remove some of the powder coat. But that shouldn't be too hard to get a nice firm fit on that. At which point, license plate lights on, turn signals are on. You can see they're much stiffer. Go ahead and thread all the 3 electrical connectors through that central hole, the central slot. And then we're going to install the grommet. So thread them through. Try not to twist them up, and if they are, take this opportunity to put them where they should be. And when I say that, what I mean is that you kind of align right, left, and center to be that way. So you kind of have that arrangement. Really the final step of this integration is going to be to take your electrical connectors, take the grommet that's supplied, and roll it over. Obviously the first license plate light one is the biggest one, so start with that one. And you can either stretch the grommet out around it like this, which is probably the preferred way, or you can roll it over, kind of roll the grommet over on itself, which does stretch the grommet a little much, but is certainly an option. But thread the 3 connectors through, and maintaining the kind of arrangement of wiring loom that you like, you're going to now jam this grommet into this oval slot. So it's a little bit of a, again, a little bit of a brute force task, but you just start introducing the grommet. You should be able to feel it seat, and then you kind of march around. And this is probably one of the more challenging parts of the installation, but it is one of those things where, as long as you're patient, there's absolutely no reason why you can't get it to get in there. Now, probably the first thing you'll notice is when you finally get it seated, it'll be a little wrinkly, and on the top surface you'll kind of think, well, why does it look like that? If you flip it over, you'll see it's kind of caught. So use either your fingernails or another prying instrument, preferably not a metal screwdriver, just to lift that lip, and you'll get to a point where your 3 connectors are very firmly squeezed by that grommet, which is good, because you are kind of expecting this grommet to help with wire management as well as protecting it from getting damaged by vibration and rubbing. So at that point, you've fully assembled your Fender Eliminator and it's ready to get onto the motorcycle. That being said, we'll show you the cutout on the underside of the motorcycle, or the features that require this cutout on the tail section. One of the other things that kind of bump in the plastics that we'll show in a second require is that 4 aluminum spacers are used to slightly lift the Fender Eliminator away from the motorcycle. But by using these nice machine spacers, the contact is still being made. You're not kind of floating the Fender Eliminator off some plastic interference. So that's the way these spacers install, and because we use these 4 pressed-in studs, you can install all 4 at the same time, and it's very easy compared to kind of loose hardware and washers and things like that. Now, before we install the Fender Eliminator on the motorcycle, it's worth looking at the underside of the Z900 once the factory fender is removed in a little bit of detail. So the biggest thing that separates this bike from something like the Z650, for example, is there's a big metal crossbar where the wiring wants to go kind of straight up. So what it does is it makes an immediate right turn. There's a tab here that you can tuck some of the looming under, although that is a little bit of a challenge to put all of it. At least put one of them under there. But what you really see is there's this plastic channel and corresponding kind of bump here. So that is why the Vagabond Motorsports Fender Eliminator kit has these 2 kind of cutouts and the spacers. So it kind of very precisely fills in this gap. And so that's something to look for in competitors' products if you're kind of cross-shopping Vagabond with others, is that we've done a full laser scan of this, the underside of this motorcycle, to make our fit perfect. And so otherwise what you're going to end up with are products that are going to be pushing on this plastic way too hard and make for a very kind of unstable Fender Eliminator, as well as probably crack this plastic piece. And so when we go ahead and install the Fender Eliminators, can be pretty simple because we've got those 4 studs. We're going to line the 4 studs up with the 4 holes in the plastic, and we're going to push our 3 wiring looms through this channel. And so we'll go ahead and do that now. And like we discussed earlier, you'll get your 4 aluminum spacers supplied with the kit and place them over the 4 studs in preparation for this installation. So what I would do is kind of rest the Fender Eliminator on the rear tire, try not to let it flop over, and start with the biggest of the connectors. The license plate light connector is far and away the biggest one. And you can kind of grasp on one end of the plastic kind of undertail and just pull it down enough to get that connector out the other side. And then you're going to follow it up with the right and left turn signals. And the right and left turn signal connectors are much smaller, so they are much easier. But the process is the same. Kind of push them to the right side, brake side of the motorcycle, and guide them out. And start kind of pulling. Let's see what we're, figure out which one's the loose one, and pull all 3 kind of tight at the same time. Now there is that wiring clip that, as I mentioned, you can use or not use because everything is so tight under here that it is certainly not a requirement, and it will make things a little challenging. But what you're going to do is pull your wiring at the same time as you're lining up your 4 studs in your 4 holes. And what you're going to find is that it's a little bit of a two-handed operation, which is why having those studs is so critical. Then one of the last is take one of the lock nuts that's supplied with the kit and spin it all the way down and just make it hand tight. And that's going to make the whole assembly workable without falling apart on you. Now if we move to the top side of the motorcycle, it's a little clearer to see where you've got your 3 electrical cables coming out the side, going under this little green taped portion of the harness. They're going to get reconnected in a bit, but we've spun down one of our supplied lock nuts, and this is going to be the time to spin down the other 3. After you've got them on by hand, so you don't risk dropping one down into the tail section of the motorcycle, you can use your 10mm socket to tighten them up. And like all 4-bolt patterns, there's a little bit of crossing you should do so that you're tightening all 4 relatively evenly. But once all 4 of those are secure, you should notice that your Fender Eliminator is rock solid and it's very level. There's not any kind of misfit, and if there is, it's time to examine, make sure you got those spacers in, and make sure there's nothing, no wiring or anything like that tucked in the way. So, like most Fender Eliminator installs, there will be some extra wiring, and we'll get to that in a second, but I would say start with the license plate light connector, because it's a little bit more buried than the others. Hold on a second. You're gonna have to pull that boot back again. There we go. But reconnect your 3 connectors that we disconnected for the license plate light and turn signals. Obviously they're keyed, so they only go one way. After which, pull that boot back over the connectors, and it's not a huge service loop, but there is going to be one, and our recommendation is going to more or less keep that boot in the same place, which is folding it back towards the front of the motorcycle and letting that loop kind of form itself. There's a little bit of extra work there because you're going to tuck that extra wiring that comes from shortening the factory fender kind of all together. Now, realistically, just kind of squeeze it into that shape so that it's not kind of exploding out. Once we put that extra that top part of the body on, it's all going to be very well contained, and it shouldn't be anything you have to worry about. Now, speaking of that top plastic, that's going to be the next step. So we're going to you kind of pull it around the tail section, because it does kind of wrap around it, but all you're trying to do is line up the 4, I think there's 4, yeah, sorry, 3 tabs per side with the 3 kind of slots, and it does kind of help to start on one end and then very gently kind of pull it around, at least in my experience. Then you're just going to be lining up the tabs, make sure they're all in their kind of larger rearward position, and it's definitely worth it to double check and make sure all the tabs are in position before you try to push it forward, because once you push it forward you don't want to bind up. It should be a very kind of nice smooth motion where everything kind of clicks into position. Now once that's on there, all we have to do is replace the factory hardware. I'll start with these rearward 4mm screws. I always recommend installing these by hand as opposed to using the power driver, especially the first few threads, so that you don't cross thread anything. And it also gives you the chance to get all the bolts in before you tighten anything too much, so that the plastics can kind of move as they need to get all the bolts to line up. That's just kind of a best practices thing. So the 4mm bolts, and then the 2 Phillips. And in particular, you got to be careful with these 2 Phillips, because these are just screwing straight into another piece of plastic. So there's no point in going really heavy tightness with that, because you're just going to strip out a piece of your motorcycle. The 4mm bolts on the back, you can go tight because you're going metal to metal contact and you're in a real structural thread. But tighten that. So you can see that whole bundle of service loop is kind of captured in this pocket of the tail section. If you move this seat latch down for more access, make sure you pull it back up before you pop the rider seat back on. But we're just going to reverse a couple of the simple steps that we started at the beginning, which is the rider seat, which you start at the front, hook it in, push it down, latch it so that's locked, and then the passenger seat. So tuck it in the back, and that's it. Yeah, latch it in. Now once the installation is complete, one of the more interesting views that differentiate our product from a lot of our competitors is going to be the underside view. So you can see there's no exposed hardware in terms of the 4 bolts that connect it to the frame. You can see those slots that are cut into our top plate of our Fender Eliminator are matched up perfectly with the bosses on the factory undertail. You see our grommet is really grasping those 3 wire looms in a nice tight way, so that wire management is fairly clean. And that, from kind of a geometry of the pocket and that kind of little bump that's on the undertail of the Z900, our Fender Eliminator is designed to be a kind of a perfect fit. Now at this point, the installation of the Fender Eliminator kit is complete. Once you install your license plate, I would recommend doing a full systems check to make sure all your lights are fully functioning before you go for a ride. But I want to say thank you for watching this video. Please let us know if you have any questions or comments on the installation or the product itself. We can be contacted direct through our website, www.vagabondmotorsports.com. We sell our parts direct through that same website, but also on Amazon for you Prime members and eBay. Thank you very much.